I will introduce Martin by saying he started with AHPRA in December 2009 as the inaugural Chief Executive Officer. With more than 15 years' experience in patient safety in Australia, the United Kingdom and internationally, he brings strong expertise in public protection and quality improvement to the work of establishing and leading AHPRA. Before joining AHPRA, Martin was Chief Executive of the National Patient Safety Agency, the National Health Service, leading the National Health Service body for patient safety in England and Wales. From 2004 to 2007, Martin worked for the World Health Organization to establish a global program of work on patient safety. From 2000 to 2002, he worked with the Australian Council of Safety and Quality in Healthcare to establish the first national program on patient safety in Australia. Martin holds a Master of Management degree in Public Sector Management, an Honours degree in Behavioural Sciences, and an undergraduate degree in Social Studies. Martin, thank you for coming and joining with us. I know it's a tough gig, but thank you for taking up the gauntlet and coming and talking with us. And hopefully we can come to some way forward at the end of your talk in this meeting. Thank you very much. Please can you welcome Martin.
Thank you, Mukesh, and thank you to AHPRA for the invitation to be here today. As Mukesh said, we welcome the opportunity for engagement and constructive dialogue, and look forward to the outcomes of this meeting and how we can build upon that. So I've been here since morning tea and heard people speak very passionately, with very strongly held views about their own experience with the regulatory system and their views about the shortcomings of the current regulatory system and their views about what might need to change to improve it in the future. Now, obviously, you'll appreciate I'm not in a position to comment about individual matters or individual cases, but what I do want to do in my presentation today is really just set out to you how the process works, who is involved in the process. I will show you some data as well, and there is more where that came from, if there's areas of data that would be of interest to AHPRA in following up today. And I'll talk a little bit about areas in which we're working to improve the system. I would not for a moment stand here and say the system is perfect. I think it is improving, and I think it is a very solid foundation on which to build. But I think there are areas which we would recognise and are actively working on to improve, and I'll just highlight those areas as well. Two other comments just in my opening comments. One is, notwithstanding the strength of views and the range of views in the room about what's wrong and what needs to be fixed, my sense is that at the end of the day we would all share a common goal around a regulatory system that is protecting patients and is keeping patients safe, but is obviously also, it's important that it is also fair to the practitioners involved. So I hear that there are a range of views about how well the system does that now, but I would believe that that is a common goal that we would all share ultimately, that we should have a system that keeps patients safe and is fair to the practitioners involved. And the other point I want to make is we do recognise how incredibly stressful it is for a practitioner to be subject to a notification or a complaint. I think we've heard that it is probably, in a sense, at times feels close to catastrophic to be somebody before your board in relation to a concern about your practice. And, one of the things that we are very keen to do and is very much on our agenda is how can we recognise and improve the experience for practitioners who are subject to notifications. I don't think a practitioner is ever going to welcome it, but what makes it a fair, open process for that person, and clearly the timeliness of the process is important in that. But I'd also highlight that it's also very stressful for notifiers as well. And so we have a challenge around the experience for notifiers in that we need to address as well. And I would say we look often at other jurisdictions, and I would say that challenge of, if you like, how you humanise the notifications experience is a challenge that regulators face around the world. And if you're interested in this area, the GMC in the UK, for example, just published some very interesting research about work they've done with practitioners who are subject to complaints and fitness to practice processes. And, I think many of the themes I think resonate with some of the discussion that we've heard today. So we've heard already, just as by way of background, this is the national scheme. It's a multi-profession scheme. It's been in place since the 1st of July 2010. Nearly 660,000 health practitioners who are regulated under the national scheme. Medicine's about 110,000, so it's about 17 or 18% of the overall number of practitioners who are registered. Nursing and midwifery is 340,000, so by far the largest profession. Although medicine is 17% of the registrant base, it accounts for over 50% of the notifications that we deal with. So you've heard the number, there's about 10,000 notifications per year nationally, so more than half of those are about medical practitioners, and that pattern has been very consistent since the start of the national scheme. And we've heard from the earlier presentation that it's the intention of ministers, because it requires change to our legislation, for paramedicine to come into the scheme from 2018. What do we do? So AHPRA works in partnership, and that's the important word here for us, partnership with the 14 national health practitioner boards and accreditation authorities to basically do what you would expect a regulatory scheme to do, to set professional standards, to register and renew practitioners, to maintain a national register. And one of the things that's very important about the national scheme from a public interest point of view is a single place where the public can now go for accurate and complete and consistent information about the registration of all of those 657,000 health practitioners, to manage notifications, and we've heard a bit in the discussion the language of notification complaint. By and large, notification, particularly for the community, is a bit of a, they don't really know what that means, so it tends to be complaint notification in some of the language. To accredit programs of study, so that's the pathway for an educational qualification to registration, and to deal with offences. And to give you an example, you probably saw in the media recently that we recently prosecuted a person in New South Wales who was holding themselves out to be a registered medical practitioner when they weren't. So that's an example of one of the things that we do to protect the integrity of being a regulated profession, to make sure that action is taken against people who are not entitled to use the title of being a registered health practitioner. Now, let me just talk about who does what, because I think this is really important to understand. And I mean, I've become used to the fact that everything that's wrong with regulation in Australia is usually AHPRA's fault. But in fact, there are some quite distinct roles and responsibilities within the national scheme. And I would make the point that these are the roles and responsibilities under our legislation. There are bodies like PSR, the role of colleges and the like that are quite separate employers from what are the requirements under the national law. But essentially we have 14 national boards, so one for each of the professions, and there'll be 15 when paramedicine comes in, and essentially they set the regulatory standards, codes and guidelines which are the framework for regulation within which each profession is regulated. And by and large, there is some harmonisation across those standards. For example, criminal history in Australia is common across all the professions. There is no difference between the professions, but obviously when it comes to things like requirements around CPD and the like, there is some difference for different professions. Those national boards comprise practitioner members and community members. They are appointed by the Council of Health Ministers on a 3-year basis. So there's been some comment recently about there seem to be a lot of vacancies being advertised. That is the normal cycle of vacancies being advertised on boards, where people can apply for appointment or can apply for reappointment on those boards. Those national boards then establish state boards or committees to deal with individual matters to do with practitioners. So I'll use the example of medicine. So medicine, there is a national board for medicine chaired by Dr. Joanna Flynn. The medical board in turn has then delegated to a state board or a territory board in each state and territory the responsibility for making regulatory decisions about individual doctors, consistent with the standards, codes and guidelines that are set by the national board. That structure varies slightly across professions. So there is a similar structure for nursing and midwifery, but there are different structures for some of the smaller professions that tend to use single national committees because there's a much smaller number of matters that they're dealing with. So AHPRA, the organisation I lead, basically is the organisation that is responsible, in the context of notifications here, for managing the assessment and investigation of complaints or notifications on behalf of boards. Now, I think one of the things that's really important to understand is that AHPRA does not make any decisions about notifications in relation to individual doctors or individual practitioners. All of those decisions are made through boards and committees that comprise practitioner and community members. And in the case of state and territory boards, they are boards that are again appointed through state and territory health ministers through an advertising process, so that anybody can put their hand up and apply and go through that selection process if they're interested. And again, contrary to reports that you might read in the media, there is significant interest in those appointments, both from the point of view of new people wanting to come onto boards and existing people wanting to be reappointed. So it's important that the decisions are made by the boards in terms of notifications. We do not make the decisions, and that includes the decision not to do something. There are then the health complaints entities. So in each state and territory there is a separate health complaints commission that has a responsibility around health service and system complaints. They are state and territory based. They're not part of the national law per se, although I'll show you how we interact with them. And they essentially look at the wider system and service issues to do with notifications and complaints, and we've heard in some of the discussion today about that sort of importance of wider organisational context and the like for some of the concerns that get expressed. There are then independent tribunals in each state and territory. So here in Victoria, for example, it is VCAT, the Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal. There are similar tribunals all around Australia. They are the independent decision makers for professional misconduct, and they are also the point of appeal for a practitioner if a decision is appellable under national law. So let me be very clear, a board cannot cancel registration. A board can suspend registration where there is an immediate risk to patient or public safety, but ultimately, if it is a question of professional misconduct that may lead to cancellation of registration, that can only be made by a tribunal or a court. And then we have a National Health Practitioner Ombudsman, Sam Gavel, who is basically an independent point of review of complaints about the processes of AHPRA and the board. So it's important she does not have jurisdiction over outcome. Her jurisdiction is in relation to the process that was followed to arrive at the outcome, either on the part of AHPRA or a board or any of its boards or committees. Now, two other things that are important to note. There are different types of co-regulatory arrangements in New South Wales and Queensland. So welcome to the Federation. So in New South Wales, we have nothing to do with complaints. They are handled by a completely separate system of councils and the Health Complaints Commission. We get the outcome because if it needs to feed into the National Register, it needs to be reflected there, but we do not handle those complaints. In Queensland, we have another arrangement again where when a notification first comes in or a complaint, it goes to an ombudsman and he decides which of those complaints come over to boards and AHPRA. And in fact, the legislation requires him to hang on to the more serious stuff. So you know, as I say, welcome to the Federation, the complexity of different arrangements in different states and territories, and, you know, I accept that that often makes it difficult for people to understand, you know, the moving parts and who does what under the scheme. One other comment before I move off this slide. So I've talked about our national law. It's the Health Practitioner Regulation National Law Act. It is not Commonwealth legislation. It is state and territory legislation, so all the ministers agreed to a common legislation with those exceptions as I've described for New South Wales and Queensland. It's been passed in each state and territory parliament. There is no Commonwealth legislation. There is no government funding. We are completely funded by the fees that are paid by practitioners to be registered. So how does the process work at its simplest? So we receive a complaint or a notification probably, well, on the latest data, about 90% of the complaints or notifications we receive are voluntary. Around 10% are what are called mandatory notifications. And people are perhaps aware that under the national law there are certain obligations on health practitioners, on employers, and in some cases on educational providers to report both registered practitioners and students if the conduct is considered to be notifiable conduct. Again, there's slight variations in WA and Queensland around that, but at its core, it's a 90-10% split. Every complaint we receive is assessed according to the risk that it potentially poses for questions of public protection, patient safety, and the decision to do something, the decision not to do something, is a decision of that board or committee which comprises practitioner and committee members. Yes, AHPRA provides advice. Yes, AHPRA does the work that feeds into that, but the decision is not the decision of AHPRA, it is of the board or committee. Now, a little bit more detail about the process, and I'll go quickly, but there may be things people want to return to here. So there's a point at which a matter is accepted into the process. So it has to first of all have to be about a registered health practitioner, because we cannot take action against someone who's not registered unless it's an example, as I said before, of somebody claiming to be registered when they're not. It has to be a ground under the national law, so it has to be about performance, it has to be about conduct, or it has to be about some form of health or impairment concern. Once it's accepted, it is then assessed to work out whether there is a threshold for regulatory action is taken. So we are not a complaints resolution agency. We are there to look at whether there is a question of risk to the public that may require regulatory action to be taken. A legal threshold has to be met. Now let me tell you, 50% of doctors who are subject to complaint are closed at assessment with no further action, and those complaints are closed within 3 months. So for a large proportion of medical practitioners, and I'm giving the data from medicine, they would go no further than a process that took a maximum of 3 months in relation to assessment. We then have the stages of investigation, health assessment or performance assessment, depending on what the issue might be. And then depending on the outcome of that process, it may be something that's considered by a panel, or it may be a referral to a tribunal. If I draw a line before panel and tribunal, because we've heard today, and I accept there are some issues around timeliness in terms of panel and tribunal processes. We don't control tribunal timeframes always. That's a matter because they're independent. But if I draw a line before that process and I look at all the matters for medicine, again, that we've got open at the moment, 85% of those are less than 12 months old. So we are very focused on timeliness because we recognise that a timely process is very important. It's about, of 3,000 matters last year, about 100 went to panel or tribunal, a longer process, but it is a small proportion of the overall number of matters that proceed. 2 other comments about this: not a linear process, so at any time a board could decide to take what is called immediate action, where there is a concern about immediate risk that may require suspension of a practitioner or indeed a restriction on their practice in some form, and that can occur at any stage of the process. Secondly, there are show cause processes through this, so a board cannot take action without first giving a practitioner the opportunity to put their case to the board and set out why they think the action is indicated or not indicated. And thirdly, as I said, a board can make a decision at any time in the process once it thinks it's got enough information. It doesn't need to wait to go all the way through. Once it's got enough information to make a call, it can make a decision. So I think from our point of view, the ministers were wise in their drafting of this legislation to create a model that was very flexible. Quick bit of data. 70%, this is data for medicine, and this is data as of pretty much the last couple of weeks, so year to date, so for 16-17. 70% of matters result in no further regulatory action, and that is either because there is not, the legal threshold is not met, or in some cases the practitioner themselves will take voluntary action to address whatever the concern is. Around 11% of practitioners receive a caution, and then if you combine conditions and undertakings, so a condition is imposed by a board, an undertaking is proposed by a practitioner and accepted, around 10%. Their cancellation, 1%. 15, 16, 13 medical practitioners out of 110,000 registered nationally had their registration cancelled via tribunal. So we're talking about very small numbers at that end of the continuum. What do people complain about? Where do complaints come from? Interesting, because there was some data that looked a bit different. I think the AHPRA data, the bulk of complaints are actually coming from patients, relatives, members of the public, so that's about 70%. Other practitioners around 10%. employer 3, and within other would be, for example, self-referral, which might happen in the case of a health impairment. And what do people complain about? Clinical care. So some concern about an aspect of clinical care has consistently been the largest category of notification, again, since the start of the scheme. 2 more slides and I've finished. I thought you might be interested in this. When you look overall at what proportion of the registered health workforce for different professions are subject to a complaint or notification at any time, you can see medicine highlighted there at 5% last financial year, and sort of dental coming in next. But again, we're talking about a relatively small proportion of the overall percentage of people who are practising within that or registered within that profession. My final slide, how are we working to improve? And I'll just step on these really quickly, and happy to come back in any detail on any of these. As I said, one of our goals is to get the stuff out of the system quickly that doesn't need to be there, and to focus on the stuff that may need more intensive investigation. So we're continuing to trial new approaches to triage of complaints to really try and get that process as smooth as possible. I've talked about the fact that we've got a very strong focus on the reduction of investigation timeframes, and particularly in preventable sources of delay. So just to give you one example, we've had an issue about data exchange with Medicare, where we may need Medicare data, and we've recently done an MOU to make sure that we can streamline that process and reduce that as a source of delay. We are now routinely surveying notifiers and practitioners about their experience around communication, around information, around understanding of reasons for decisions and the like. And in fact, we shared some of those data with the Senate Committee, and they're on our submission if you're interested, and I'd be happy to share more with AHPRA. We work with the professional indemnity organisations. We had a meeting this week with the AMA, our 3rd meeting. We do it annually on the whole work we're doing around practitioner experience and how that can be improved. We have a new online complaints portal to kind of streamline that process. Vexatious complaints, probably another whole topic in its own right. Our message on vexatious complaints is that on any of the available data that we have, we are talking about a small number of complaints, but we recognise that they can have a significant impact on the individuals involved. We are commissioning work on vexatious complaints, and there is work underway also to do things like strengthen the code of conduct for medicine around action that might be taken against vexatious complainants. But the particular piece of work that we're commissioning with the University of Melbourne in the first case is going to be looking at what the models are from other regulators, both in health internationally and other sectors, around identification, management and reduction of vexatious complaints. And again, I think that would be a piece of work that's probably of great interest to AHPRA. We're working with government legislative amendments. 2 other quick things. I think there's been some really interesting discussion about reporting culture today, because on the one hand, I mean, we heard from Senator Xenophon this morning, going way back to Bundaberg, about the problem of what happens when people aren't listened to. So I don't think we want a reporting culture where people don't feel they're able to raise concerns. But equally, we want a reporting culture that actually is identifying the right things, and the example from the construction industry I think is interesting for us. But I think that is a shared goal. I think what creates a positive reporting culture, because there are way too many stories that you know about of people who have been tolerated in the health system, where there have been workarounds and nobody's found out about the problem until it's very late in the process. So that's in no one's interest. And we've also heard about health and wellbeing, and I did want to just highlight that both the Medical Board of Australia and the Nursing and Midwifery Board of Australia have recently funded national health programs, so quite separate from what we do as a regulator or any regulatory action we might take around impairment. These programs are at arm's length, deliberately from AHPRA, at arm's length, deliberately from the boards, to actually be a point of support, referral, advice to health practitioners and students, recognising the very real issues of stress, wellbeing, depression, mental health that have been talked about. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.